Hi, my name is Tim Okamura. I'm a painter from Canada originally. I reside here in Brooklyn, New York. I've been in New York for 24, almost 25 years, since 1991, and most of those years I've spent in Brooklyn. When I was still in college in Calgary, Canada, I went to the Alberta College of Art and Design. My interests were leaning towards a lot of things that were going on in New York, just organically. I just was really in love with hip hop. I had a hip hop radio show in Calgary, in Canada, back in the late 80s, early 90s. Had some incredible guests on the show like Ice-T and Will Smith. And it was really a fortunate experience. I also was really into letter forms, even when I was younger. And then when graffiti came around, I got really excited by that. So coming to New York had those things, but also I was very much into classical painting and academic painters and master works throughout history. Rembrandt was a big hero of mine, so to be able to come to New York and be able to go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and look at a Rembrandt, and then to go downtown and see some amazing graffiti on the wall, and then to meet somebody who had a story that was completely unfamiliar to my experience growing up. All of those things combined really to basically just stimulate the direction that I ended up going in, which is this amalgamation of street art, classical painting, hip hop, rock, and also my interest in being sort of a storyteller through portraiture. It all kind of synthesized into this outcome that you see now on canvas. Yeah, I think everything about New York has been a source of inspiration for me in one form or another. It's an absolutely vibrant city for creative people. I think there's always stimulation, there's always some kind of revelation, I think, going on. As much external stimuli as there is, there's also, I think you're forced to look inside yourself a lot too. And so there's a lot of contemplation of deeper issues, just because it can be such a challenging city to live in. And if you don't sort of find that internal fortitude, you'll be lost and you'll end up leaving. So I think on multiple levels, New York has been both inspiring visually in terms of ideas, and also just a great test of determination and dedication to what I do. With graffiti and street art, it was seen as vandalism, I know, in the late 70s, early 80s. I think that people recognized at the time that it could also be an art form, but it really started to evolve into, I think, something that's actually become pretty well respected overall. I think that there's some artists that are huge now that really just made a name for themselves doing pieces on the street, all over the world now. It kind of reminds me of the journey of hip hop. When people said this isn't music, this is just people talking over, some old record. Those are what the detractors were taken away from it. But now it's like, listen, hip hop's here to stay. There's so many subgenres. We get it. It's a part of music, an important part of music. It's part of music history, and I think that graffiti and street art is a part of art history at this point. Even in the early stages of development of man, when there was hieroglyphics, basically on cave walls, there's a connection to that. Or when, some of the British explorers in Egypt were carving their names into some of the temples, that they discovered. They felt a need to leave a mark, and I think that graffiti, has been a natural sort of a naturally occurring thing, like a need to leave a mark and a need to show people that, I was here, I lived in this world. And then it got elevated and turned into a real sophisticated, very sophisticated in some cases, art form. People have skills now that I can't believe, they're using spray cans on the street to create incredible masterpieces. As an artist, I think if you have any sense of social responsibility, I think it's important to make some pieces that are a statement, in support of the protest, and also, hopefully thought-provoking in some way. A lot more awareness of art's ability to play a role in dialogue and the discussion of these incidences of social injustice that have really been such a hot button topic in America lately. I think there's been a lot of encouragement to explore the direction of work that's more meaningful in that regard. I think that maybe there's been a little bit of maybe a little more conservative approach in my work. I haven't really explored like themes of power, protest, resistance, of art of revolution, let's say. And I use those buzzwords because I was just in a show at Rush Arts, curated by Danny Simmons. They're very socially conscious, and so Danny brought me into a show called Power, Protest, Resistance. And it's the first time I think I've really kind of made a more definitive step towards saying, this work is more of a rallying point, more of a visual sort of battle cry, I guess. And in the work that's behind me, I'm continuing down that path, and have a young woman who has a bullhorn that is making a proclamation. It's going to be entitled, the painting is going to be entitled Loud and Clear, or We Hear You Loud and Clear. And it's really about that, I guess sort of peaceful resistance idea and getting a message out there, making it be heard in a way that people are finally paying attention to. It's a time where we're hearing, one tragedy after another, one heartbreak after another, and it's very honestly getting overwhelming. But the one thing that I've sort of taken away from it as a very slight positive, if you can say there's any positive in these, types of tragedies, but at least people are paying attention, and at least art is now playing a role in sparking some dialogue about it, and hopefully that dialogue will lead to change. This piece has to go down to Miami for Art Basel, and I've got a couple weeks still, but I'm working on a lot of other stuff also. It's like I have a pretty basic palette: white, cad yellow, cad red, yellow ochre, raw sienna, burnt sienna, alizarin crimson, Van Dyke brown, a little bit of Prussian blue, and ivory black. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 colors. So the pressure is on, and that's a big part of being, working as a professional artist is deadlines. Basically, managing your deadlines, meeting your deadlines, delivering work when you say you're going to. There's always been a difference between fine art and then the fine art of verbal defense of something that needs defending. There's some obvious painters that, like a Rembrandt, a Velázquez, like some of the old masters that I think most people generally agree are absolutely amazing and are still amazing. But there's some people that have become inspirational to me lately that were kind of an acquired taste. I've gone back to people like, I mentioned the old masters, then of course, I was looking at Basquiat at one point. I love Larry Rivers' work. I've come around to, maybe not embracing, 20 years ago, like Julian Schnabel's work, but I'm looking at it now, and I'm getting a lot of it in a way that I didn't back then. So I'm finding that's kind of a revelation, as I'm going back to some artists that I just wasn't mature enough to see in the same way that I can see now. And I ignored them, and now I'm kind of rediscovering, like a Cy Twombly, for instance. I just don't think I could appreciate his work 20 years ago. Now I look at it, it's genius. You can't always predict how long it's going to take you to make a painting. Sometimes there's setbacks, sometimes there's just mental setbacks. You just don't have the energy to paint. You don't have the, just the motivation certain days. And it's hard. I think maybe that's the true sign of a professional, is like, even when you don't feel like painting, even when you don't want to, you still get yourself in the studio and you still do it. You still show up for work. But if you look at a stack of paint here, probably the bottom is paint from about, at least, well, I'd say about 10 years ago. This is probably a decade of paint, and it's been cut down several times, and it's kind of crazy, but I don't even think about it too much, but then when I look at it, I'm like, yeah, this is kind of a weird, weird thing. I've been painting for 30 years, and I'm still discovering things. I'm still learning new techniques, and maybe that's the other important thing to know, is that you never stop learning as a painter. It's a genre of expression that's meant to be open to trying anything and everything. I think that naturally people in this day and age seem to gravitate more towards something that takes skill, or something that's thought-provoking, in a more complex way. I think that there's a lot of pretenders right now because art, in many ways, has become a very trendy thing to do. I think that it's been pushed by certain, members of pop culture into becoming something cool, which overall is a great thing. But it also brings in a lot of people saying that they're artists and trying to make art that don't necessarily have enough training, enough thought behind what they're doing. But yeah, basically, it's about kind of building up the texture underneath, and then I'll go back over top and worry about highlights once this stuff is dry. People ask me how I make the texture, and it's all oil paint. And I like to have a little bit of dried or semi-dry paint in there to give some chunks and bits and pieces. I just try to mimic whatever texture as best I can, and then once I get this is New York City trains, sirens, car crashes nonstop. This is like an old 1950s sort of kidney table, which is on top of a hospital table, so it actually cranks up and down, which is good if I'm working higher. If I'm up a ladder, I can get this up higher. I find it's akin to sculpture in a way. It's sort of like a relief sculpture on parts of my surface, and I like that. I like the physicality of paint. Some areas can be very thin, washy, transparent, and then other areas can be very, very opaque. This is a painting from about a year and a half ago called The Prayer, and it's interesting to pull it out because it's a painting that I felt like wasn't quite resolved. I usually have this kind of gut feeling when a painting is working or when it's not quite working. And it's interesting because sometimes I know that I've sent paintings out to show that I just haven't felt completely convinced about. And the irony is, like, they usually come back. They usually come back to me. They don't end up finding a home. And I feel kind of good about that because I kind of know, like, it wasn't quite fully resolved. I think there's some color issues for me, and I think that even something about the pose I'm not entirely convinced is working, and maybe some proportions, maybe some drawing things. I'll struggle with this painting for the next couple weeks and hopefully find a way to feel like it's really working. But it's, the one positive I think is knowing that it's not quite what it could be yet. And recognizing that, I think, is sort of part of that sort of internal quality control. A friend of mine once say, as we're walking around a museum, saying, you know what, I'm so glad I'm in a museum because most of the stuff in here amazes me. And that's what I want to experience when I look at art. I don't know much about art. All I know is I just want to be amazed. And when I feel amazed, I feel like I'm engaged and I can really get something out of the piece. And to your earlier point, I think that same friend would probably say, like, looking at a dot does not engage them, and the experience is over very quickly. Handling criticism is one of the biggest challenges as an artist. I mean, I think that you want people to appreciate and enjoy the work that you're doing. There's a lot of sacrifice, a lot of dedication that goes into a lot of time. I mean, it's really, me being a painter right now is a culmination of a lifetime worth of effort. So when somebody comes along and in 2 minutes is like, oh, this sucks, just a blanket statement, it can be tough to take. I think that you do have to develop a little bit of a thick skin, and you also do have to develop a philosophical base that helps you to understand why somebody's coming at you like that, why somebody wants to tear down something that you built. It's always going to be a personal matter, you know, in terms of what you like or don't like. But I think for me, I'm kind of with this school of thought of I want to be amazed. It's the dedication to your craft, putting in the time and the effort, whether you feel like it or not. I think that makes the difference, you know, between somebody that's going to be able to cut it as a professional and somebody that just, you know, is going to fall by the wayside. I can even cut out some of these and still make any color that you just have to do more mixing. But once you know, instinctually, and I don't really think about it, once you know, you look at a color and you just make it. You don't have to like think, oh, okay, how am I going to make that? You just do it. It becomes second nature. I know a lot of self-taught painters too, but I think if you just have a passion for it, you'll find a way. That's maybe the biggest thing. Are you passionate about it? Do you love doing it? And then everything will kind of fall into place. You'll seek out the people you need. You'll seek out the information that you need to progress. The first collection that I can identify as being sort of my first serious effort was in about 1999, I believe. I remember there was the whole Y2K paranoia at that time. I think it was in late '99. I presented maybe about a dozen paintings, portraits that had graffiti backgrounds or motifs of doorways in Brooklyn, rust, and sort of an urban decay type of theme behind the sitter or the subject. And I think it was the first sort of step towards a more mature approach to art for me. This painting is called Her Story, and it's a group of 4 women, incredibly talented and intellectual women who live in Washington, D.C., 4 friends. I had an amazing time with this painting because it was part of a series I did specifically in Washington, D.C., which is an extremely interesting city because of the politics. There's such a wide spectrum of experiences there, and of course, the seat of power of the country is there. But there's also, all these experiences of people who've had a lot of challenges in their life, a lot of hardships to overcome. And I think that the women in this painting represent facets of everything about the experience in Washington, D.C. I was doing a lot of commercial work before that. I was doing storyboards for television. I was doing book covers and newspaper things, and it was always me making work to satisfy somebody else's needs. And it was the first time that I put together some paintings that were just exactly what I wanted to do and which made sense to me at that time. The fact that in this painting the women are facing away from each other, so you can get into each of their individual personas, but you can also see them as a collective and as a group. I kind of like almost that romantic idea from movies where you're cornered, you sort of fight back to back. And I felt like that was kind of part of what this pose really transmits, is like, that person has your back, essentially. I think that first collection was the first step in this journey that I've continued for the last 16 years or so. I sort of thought of the idea of, again, a portrait about somebody that reflects a little bit about their life story, their history, their background. And I think the collage elements sort of help to fill in a little bit of that. I love history, I love antiques, and so a lot of these pieces are literally authentic antique elements. They're all having to do with communication. And this is again from the show Begin Transmission, which was about communication, about the idea of dialogue, but also exploring in older forms. Like, we use cell phones now, we text message, we email, but at one point, you might have to send a telegraph to somebody. So there's elements of old telegraph kits, Western Union telegram, Morse code, semaphore signal guides. Here's like a 45 record that's a Morse code instruction course. And I just love that idea of seeing the evolution of communication over time. With the street art, with a sense of lyricism, music is always playing in the back of my head, even when I'm painting. I think a lot of the same concerns are there. I'm now trying different things. I'm trying to experiment a little bit and push boundaries, but I can probably identify that series. I think I called it series Urban Portraits back in 1999 as the beginning of this sort of road that I've been on.